Our conversation around the 2022 campaigns and the general election that's coming up in August continues. Now, this time, let's talk about public order management during this electioneering period. And joining us is an officer from the Independent Medical Legal Unit, Isabella Obara, who's a program officer for redress. Isabella, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the show. Welcome to the hot seat.
Thanks for having me.
Situation Room.
Asante.
Program officer redress, what do you do?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about what IMLU does and who we have been talking to, or rather attending to, for the past 29 years and 1 month. So the Independent Medical Legal Unit is a non-governmental organization specifically looking at issues of human rights, and their mandate is to prevent and to respond to torture and related violations. And an interesting thing that I would like to tell this particular panel is that when we are speaking about torture, we get it twisted sometimes. So allow me to tell you just a snippet of what torture essentially is. This is infliction of physical or mental pain to a person by a public officer in their official capacity or in the acquiescence of that particular public officer. So just by way of that, and then we've worked with more than 6,000 victims of torture by offering them a legal aid, ensuring their access to legal support, documentation, and so on and so forth. We have also ensured that we give them rehabilitative services such as psychological support, medical support, and for those ones who unfortunately pass, we get them to undergo autopsy examinations, as well as have those post-mortem reports used as evidence or other expert witness in terms of going to court. So outside of that, because that's purely reparations, we also work around advocacy in the police sector reforms. So then again, we're saying that we work with duty bearers, like, state agencies, say IPOA, IU, the ODPP, and so on. And for us, in terms of advocacy, we are looking at empowering them, or rather capacity building them in areas that we see a gap, or even partnering with them in projects that would help ensure that security in Kenya is something that it's looked at a proper level, and we also ensure that the policies or the laws are comprehensive in terms of covering the issues that we get to deal with in the human rights spectrum. Yeah.
So, I mean, just taking a look at what you do, obviously there's work that's being done, and that means that there was a problem. There are gaps, obviously, that need to be filled. And looking at this recent report, obviously that is the plug for what we talk about today. There's still gaps. There's still a problem. This torture that we talk about, the disappearance of people, the abductions of individuals, the large numbers of unclear circumstances under which people have disappeared and then have probably been tortured, etc., still continues to be an issue.
It is.
So clearly and honestly, the duty bearers that you mentioned, the ones who have been named as the highest alleged perpetrators, what is being done? What is the clear situation of things today in the country when it comes to some of those that you've mentioned?
Ndu, let me paint for you a picture. Last year, that's only 2021, from 1st of January to 31st of December, we had 210 cases of torture, extrajudicial execution, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, as well as enforced disappearance. And a huge chunk of this number, specifically 46%, were extrajudicial executions.
So we're talking about people, just for clarity of purpose here, people who turned up dead. Right?
Either instantly or found dead or died after being tortured.
Who may have disappeared initially, or they had been, because why I'm asking, I think it's important to know, is not individuals who Ndu is missing today turns up dead tomorrow. There are people who've been looking for their family members, for example, and then much later they do turn up dead, and evidence of their body shows that they had been tortured. Is that what we're talking about? Time has lapsed.
Yes. When we talk of extrajudicial execution, we look at the end product. So you may be missing for maybe 10 days, and then we find your body, right? And if we undertake an autopsy report, then we get to see a history of either violence, torture, and some wounds that indicate that you didn't die a natural death, what we normally call reportable deaths. So when we find this, then you fall under the cluster of extrajudicial execution. When we are talking of forced disappearance, is we have not found you yet for various reasons. And it is believed that you disappeared in the hands of law enforcement officers, right? So that particular cluster, we only had 2% last year. And in terms of extrajudicial execution, so you pick from anyone who was tortured, anyone who was inhumane or rather treated poorly and they ended up dead. So most of all these things end up in death, sadly.
Every time I hear the term extrajudicial killing, my mind travels all across the globe. In this country, that is, if you have thought along those lines, have you found to have been the reasons behind these extrajudicial killings? Because they never seem to come to an end. There's a time when they seem to be on the rise, then they even out, but they're there. What is usually behind them?
CT, if history serves as a guideline, we have not seen them dropping. These numbers have been on the rise from far back as 1992. And I can tell you, even from our data, in 2020 we had 139 cases. In 2021 we had 210. That's a whooping 42% rise. Yeah, and there are various reasons. Let me speak a little bit about the culture of policing in Kenya. It's very punitive. We look at punishing, yet the historical beat of all national police services is to ensure and maintain public order, right? And ensure that we are upholding peace or promoting peace. But then again, from the way we do it is we are punishing. We are looking at the people as either wrongdoers or looters or people who need to be looked at, in terms of planning to ensure that they are not doing anything wrong. Yet, these people normally don't do anything wrong. Let me give you 3 clusters of what we have seen in terms of our trends in EJEs. We have noticed that there is a shift in terms of the perpetrators becoming a little bit sneakier and more brighter, so to speak. We've seen them taking people's bodies to rivers. That's one of the things. And last year we had over possibly 16 cases of such. We have also seen shooting as one of those instances where we have seen a rise in terms of EJE. We have also seen cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, which after, say, 2-3 months degenerates into deaths. So those are instances around which we have seen EJEs, rising and rising. But I also want to talk about enforced disappearance, where someone disappears for more than 2-3 months, and by the time they come back, they'll be here for about a week or 2, and they are dead, right? So it's a cluster of there's so many complexities when you're looking at EJEs, but those, at least the 4, are what we have seen as what pushes for a spike in terms of the numbers in EJE.
But extrajudicial killings, what purpose do they serve really?
Well, CT, I'll tell you, sometimes it's to obtain information, sometimes it's to intimidate, sometimes it's to push an agenda, could be political, could be business. It could be, there's so many things. But then again, for us, in terms of our cases, we have seen they occur mostly around or during arrests. Most of them. In fact, possibly 51% of our cases have occurred around arrests. And then the second cluster would be in terms of quelling insurrections. So crowd management, crowd mobilization or organization, something around that. And that's why the public order management is also very important when we're speaking about EJEs.
Apart from now, those people that turn up dead, disappear and then turn up dead, the other extrajudicial executions are those ones that you've said, during management of crowds, at demonstration, police shoot, and someone ends up dead. How many cases did you have in this report of that? Of just police, when they are tasked with going to manage a crowd, they end up using excessive force?
Well, last year we had about 30 to 36 cases. And I'm saying 30 to 36 specifically because during COVID, we noticed some form of crowd management. And it wasn't because they were protesting or they were, being rowdy or anything. It's simply because we had to enforce, or rather the law enforcement officers had to take care of the situation around COVID.
Yeah.
So when we are looking at public order management, then we are thinking probably this was an organized event, possibly this was just those single events where maybe it's industrial action or whatever. But this one, you find that someone or a group of persons, say business people, are sort of wrapping up their day, but it's already 7.
Yep.
And then they're clobbered, right? It's a crowd. You're managing it, but are you managing it well? So from those instances, we had about 30 to 36 cases.
And IMLU works very closely with other actors in this, and particularly the National Police Service.
Right.
So whenever you raise these matters with the National Police Service, what kind of response do you get? What attitude do you get from the officers that you engage with?
Well, progressively, Eric, we have seen a change of attitude. But I'll tell you, this change cannot be instantaneous because the way police do their things is more of ranks and taking orders. So in as much as we will have that initial maybe interaction and discussion and agree, there's still a way in which these bureaucratic processes in terms of ensuring that what it is that we've discussed comes into force, or maybe ensuring that they have funding around a particular project or a progress level or marker. That attitude is progressively becoming better. We have seen that they are cooperating with us. We have been training their people. We have seen that they are also engaging us better in terms of even maybe investigating matters and so on. However, we are looking at a service that works with hard and fast rules, yet most of their work is highly discretionary. So as an NGO or as a CSO, we can only partner to a given extent. The bulk of the work goes back to their training, their culture, their maybe assumptions, maybe the historical practices that they have had. It's more than just us interacting with them, but their attitude has been commendable and they've made great strides, to be quite honest. Right from having the National Police Service Act come into force in 2011, we have seen them processing or rather putting up guidelines, manual guidelines, say on public order management. We have seen them maybe coming up with service standing orders that are useful in guiding these particular engagements. So there's some progress, but we still have a long way to go.
What kind of progress? How would you define progress? For example, when we say, when we see Kanjakoma brothers, all right, there's 2 boys are founded, community rises up, community complains, somebody else, other people end up getting injured
And dead.
and then undead.
Yes.
And from the top of the police service, all you're seeing is transfers.
Right.
How can we then say that there's change of attitude on something like that? I mean, something such basic. Look at what happened in Mathare during the COVID-19 period, where that gentleman, what was his name? Vaite. In Mathare, killed police officers enforcing the order. And what's the attitude? Oh, well, police officer transferred this and that. Really, is there a change in attitude, or is there a change in attitude on paper? Are we seeing, there's no more papers being produced. We have this protocols, we have this and the other protocols, but the attitude is still the same.
Eric, let me clarify this. There's change in terms of what effort they're putting in to ensure that we have a legal framework that takes care of policing under the human rights context. However, like I said, it's very complex. On the other end, we have also seen the government, through the National Police Service, acting very well. They have a very proper muscle in terms of investigations and getting to people. Let me give you a practical example. We had a case of an officer who allegedly killed someone, and he was transferred in a day. In fact, in 24 hours, transferred to very far in Northeastern. But I can tell you, Eric, in 2 weeks, we had him at the DCI in Nairobi. They found him, arrested him, and he's currently being charged for murder. But on the other end, you have this particular person, of course I can't mention name because investigations are ongoing, who was killed while protesting for the death of the Kanjakoma brothers. So it's extrajudicial execution in another extrajudicial execution. But up until today, none of you here know his name. right? So we are seeing where the government can flex muscle, investigate and prosecute almost immediately, but we are seeing laxity in other cases. And that's what brings me to tell you this, Eric. Sometimes some of these EJEs have the blessings of people in power, and some, it's totally fine. If you do it out of your own, volition, then we'll nab you and prosecute you. So there's change in effort, all right? But in terms of doing what is supposed to be done under the framework that we have, there's very little that's being done.
We've had a conversation like this before, and where we've actually questioned whether there has been systemic change. Whether the system that is the police service has actually become a police service or is still a police force deep down, where the vertebrae is still the same. Because yes, we have all these legal frameworks coming in place with all these things and taking place, but we are seeing an increase in the number of reported forced disappearances. We are seeing an increase in the number of unexplained disappearances and reappearances of people, and no follow-ups being done by police. No cases of justice being brought.
If we're going to connect that, I mean, just this morning we had a conversation about a report that has appeared in the Standard today, right? And this is one river in Western Kenya, River Yala, where 17 bodies in 12 months have been found, right?
Unacceptable.
And we have several cases where some of them, their fingers have been cut off and burned for the sole purpose of the disappearance of identification.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So it is clear that this can be linked to this very same thing that we're talking about.
It can.
And who has been able to point that out? Forensic investigators who work with the police service.
Yes.
So they are aware.
Yes.
So the question is, if we're talking about a change in what has been done, but no change in attitude in terms of can we actually do something about this, then it seems as though we're oscillating on this same place, and we're still looking at numbers. The report, which has come from you as IMLU, also talks about the fact that the alleged perpetrators, the highest percentage is from the National Police Service.
Yes, it is, and has been for the past 5 years.
What are we talking about?
So let me, Eric, and I agree with you in totality. Here we have two questions. Is it the sufficiency or the adequacy of the law, or is it a question of attitude or culture or practice by the police? In terms of law, definitely it is still not adequate. But in the event that we implemented these laws that we have currently, we would see a change. And I can tell you for a fact, we still don't have a policy, probably in public policing, but still, if we implemented, we'd see a small drop in those numbers. The problem still lies in how the National Police Service works.
So are we in a catch-22?
It is a catch-22
the people that are supposed to actually help with the implementation of the same law are in the highest ranks when it comes to alleged perpetrators, for example. How do you deal with yourself? This is essentially what we're asking.
They are. And it even makes it worse, Ndu, because you have this particular big percentage of perpetrators investigating their very own. So how do we get to a place where we say, out of these 210 cases, we will only have 15 next year, in the event that you have very rogue police officers? And that's why you'll see, even when you get to a point where you've documented, you've investigated, and you're in court, you'll still suffer in the hands of the blue code of silence, where I am investigating Ndu, who is a fellow police officer. So I will do the minimal, or rather the bare minimum, so that I don't get you to get prosecuted. So accountability is poor or non-existent, if I may. We still don't have accountability mechanisms or measures or anything commendable. There's no honorable mention when it comes to prosecution. I mean, you could tell even from the Kianjokoma case, Ndu, that if it didn't have political goodwill, we wouldn't be where we are. And I'd like to tell you, IMLU is part of the legal team that leads the civil society in that particular case. But would we see what we saw in that case if it wasn't for even the president, putting his hand on it? Would we? Of course not.
No, we wouldn't. But you see, the Kenjakoma case...
Public outcry contributed.
It is, but it has joined the queue.
Yeah.
Because there are many cases that are almost identical to that one, some even more bizarre.
Yep.
And we are still grappling in the dark, groping in the dark and figuring what it is that actually happened and why this didn't happen. But this is a question I always ask. When we make demands of our police service, do we adequately facilitate them to be able to do what it is we require them to do?
City, beautiful question. That brings us to police budgets. You just look at how the budgets are allocated and you wonder if this is a service that's supposed to ensure and promote peace. They're not adequately facilitated. They're not adequately trained. They're not even adequately recruited, right? So we have very minimal numbers. We have a very shabby, in fact, if I may, shoddy budget allocation for a service that's supposed to work for over 48 million Kenyans. So just by that, you can tell that there's already going to be an issue.
An issue with
outside
how
of
they do their job.
Yeah, truly. Because you can't tell me to take care of 15 million people and it's 2 officers. Am I adequately trained? Do I know the tax? Am I adequately remunerated? Because you'll notice, even out of corruption, we have EJEs that are directly linked to corruption.
Yeah.
And that's why you'll see even some of our researchers in the peri-urban areas or the densely populated areas, the key factors to EJE and torture is corruption. But if you're paying me 10,000 Kenya shillings and I have worked for 15 years, I mean, well, some will say that I'll have to ask for a bribe. And if I find this person does not have enough to give me, I'll clobber them, maybe to death,
Because
or maybe
of
they'll die
the
later.
power. Eric Latif, CT Muga Nduoko, and our guest Isabella Obara, Program Officer at the Independent Medical Legal Unity. We're talking about police during this electioneering period. And Isabella, as we took the break, CT had started by asking you, do we adequately resource the police service and then expect them to actually do the job that we give them to do? Are they adequately resourced? And you said, just starting from the budget, there are questions there, which moves the responsibility now away from the police service into the other duty bearers. We have civil society organizations such as yourself and others. We have the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which is a constitutional commission. We have the National Assembly, which looks at the budget. Where do all these play in making sure that the police are doing what they're supposed to be doing with the resources that they should be having?
Well, Latif, let me tell you something. We have used a very old system of budgeting for the National Police Service, something that has been used from way back, as far back as 1992. We're still using it sometime in 2011, and we are hoping or expecting that this particular budgeting system is what would be useful to take care of over 50 million Kenyans. That's not possible. I think in 1992 we were what? I was still a child. I don't even know how many we were, but were we more than 10 million, Latif? We weren't. So resources are key. Resources are key. And we have all these bodies that discuss. But then again, Latif, it's not about who is part of the discussion. It's doing the right thing based on the current needs. The contemporary society has shifted. And definitely we have inflation. And we have a little bit more money, if I may. So how do we allocate this hefty and big salaries, say for MPs, but we still maintain the small, meager budgets that we used to have in the 90s, in the year of our Lord 2022? Latif, it can't work. It really just can't work. So point is that it starts from resourcing, because then from resourcing, we are able to even look at recruitment, professional recruitment. I know currently it's housed at the National Police Service Commission, but then again, no amount of nice words or different choice of words or uniforms would ensure that the little money is used properly. You simply have to resource them adequately.
Okay, and then there comes the oversight bit, and this is also where the civil society organizations such as yourselves, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, and Parliament comes in. We don't hear this. We read a lot of reports, from NGOs such as yourselves, saying how police have killed people, how police are behaving, how police are misbehaving, how the police reforms, as envisaged in the Constitution, have just moved 2 steps. But we don't see these other questions. We don't see these other questions of what needs to be done in terms of resourcing, and also what needs, the conversations that need to be happening in terms of oversight and making sure that the police are doing the right thing.
So by way of update, Eric, I'll tell you that IMLU, the Independent Medical Legal Unit, undertook a robust research from 2020 to 2021. And we have that particular research tabled before the Human Rights Committee of Parliament, the Security Committee, and even in Parliament sometime last year in November. We had the recommendations therein, such as recruiting better, heightening the budgets, increasing it by at least 50%, looking at how the police live and where they live, giving them allowances of possibly maybe rental allowances and allowing them to live even amongst the general public. We had so many recommendations, possibly more than 20 beautiful recommendations. They have been tabled, and even before we tabled these particular recommendations, or rather this particular research and report, we discussed it in the Police Reforms Working Group. So it has a buy-in of the CSOs, specifically those who are working around the police sector, and we also took it to the legislature, or rather the lawmakers. They have discussed it, and we're hoping to at least get feedback. And I know this will be a long discussion, but at least the steps, the initial steps have already been taken, Latif. So CSOs are doing what it is that they can do. And even from that particular research and the recommendations, you've noticed a heightened partnership in terms of working with the National Police Service and other law enforcement officers, because it's not only the National Police Service. CSOs are even working with state agencies such as IPOA, not only capacity building them, but even pushing for their funding, or even ensuring that they would get maybe sponsorships or grants to assist them in what it is that they are doing. Let me give you an example. If during COVID, we saw a very slow turnover in terms of handling complaints at IPOA, definitely you'd notice that CSOs would be like, what is it that we can do to, bridge this gap? Because this is when we need you most. So we are not just sitting back and seeing that the budgets are poor. We are also talking to the legislature and also partnering, of course, in the ways that matter, or rather in the ways that are allowable in terms of partnering from a non-governmental organization to the state.
But you know something, Isabella? I'm listening to you, and what I'm hearing is sincerity, and I'm hearing good intentions. But the real change will not come about by the research findings that you have and by tabling it to all these organizations. Because in my mind, there seem to be people who are determined that this ecosystem within which the police service exists is maintained as it is. Because I cannot understand how it is with all these intelligent people we have within government, and they are intelligent, well-informed, well-educated, who understand this subject matter we're discussing in even greater details than you can even fathom, and who know what ought to be done, how it ought to be done. And then year in, year out, we're having this same discussion. Year in, year out, we're having this same discussion. Some people somewhere like this situation. Because the discussion is never about those who are supposed to facilitate and make these things, the changes possible. No. It's always about the police.
CT, there are people who benefit purely from the dysfunction that we're dealing with here. And you and I know that for a fact. But do we then stop pushing for changes?
No, we don't.
Yes.
I am simply saying this, that instead of focusing our attention on the police, we mention the ills that we see therein, but we also focus on those who are making it impossible for there to be any lasting change.
Yep.
Because they are the real culprits.
And I agree with you. I totally agree with you. But then again, you notice the effects of adversarial engagement. Yeah, you wouldn't make so much stride. There's already dysfunction. So you're hoping you have to strike a balance. Yeah, you if you push in too hard, then of course there's nothing that will move. And if you sort of just relax and not do much, then you'll be told you are in bed with the state. So it's a very tricky balance in terms of ensuring that we see a change, as well as yanking these people off the whole.
I see it slightly differently, Isabella.
Yeah.
Lighting, okay, you know what we do, and we're very good at doing, is lighting a fire under the police service, okay?
Yeah.
When you light a fire under the police service, what essentially you're doing is you're lighting a fire under the ordinary police officer that we see. The guy who's been trying to get that traffic on Mombasa Road sorted since 3 a.m. The person who was on the beat at night carrying a G3 rifle and came across a dead body somewhere, and they had to deal with it. They had to take it to City Mortuary. That's the person that we're actually lighting a fire under. The people who benefit are not affected at all by this report that you produce. But if we actually focused on lighting a fire under where they are, by pointing out that, you know what, this officer who's here, who is now leaving to go and go back to Embakasi and the police line there, and these are the living conditions, and this is a working condition. He was brought here by a vehicle, and he has to find his way back to the station and back home, and he'll be back to work at 6 p.m. until tomorrow morning. If we actually say that this is what needs to be happened so that this officer can work better, I think it's better. Because now we castigate the police service and end up harming the people who are actually doing and trying to do good. Those are the ones who end up shooting the person on the street. We don't understand what has led them to shoot. We just think because they shot that guy, they are rogue officers. But there's all these other things, and we know budgeting. We know there is no proper oversight.
Training.
We know that there is no proper training. We know that we talked about police reforms. Police reforms went and stalled somewhere. We know we've talked about enhancing the remuneration of police officers, stalled. Enhancing the housing of police officers, stalled. Enhancing, unless we are talking about, getting uniforms which somebody else can benefit. We're talking about getting vehicles, and police leasing of vehicles has worked. How about we just shift focus a little bit?
And we talk about lighting a fire that might bring about an adversarial situation. But we've also found that situations, take your pick anywhere in the world, that there had to be a little bit of friction in order for you to get to that place. Whether it was clawing, begging, crawling, you got there at some point. But this kumbaya moment that we are having, saying that, all right, let's have a conversation and let's see how it can be better, it doesn't really get the result that we are looking for here. To get to that point where the person says, okay, hold on a minute. The spotlight is on me and my office. The friction is at my doorstep. You either do one or two things. You face it or you run. And maybe it has to get adversarial in order for us to see any kind of change. Otherwise, the next 10 years, we'll be having this conversation. We talk about year in, year out.
Yeah.
That number of 221, in the next year, it will be 440. It will be 600. It will be 1,000, and still nothing being done about it. So I dare say that perhaps it is necessary for things to get just a little bit ugly for them to become beautiful. It has to go through that process. We can like to keep the peace, but as we keep the peace, people are dying. As we keep the peace, people are disappearing. Kind of thing.
Isabella,
Police officers are dying.
Yes,
they are.
In the 1990s that you speak of, some fairly interesting things happened in this country with regards to police reforms and how it is our security forces were managed. Those who work with me in this studio have heard me say this. The Ministry of Interior, whatever it was called then, decided to purchase certain vehicles from India. I think they're called the Mahindra.
Mahindra, yes.
Now, the thing I particularly liked about those vehicles, if I ran, I could move faster than that vehicle. And I'm joking. I'm actually being facetious. I'm being facetious. But those cars were slow.
Yep.
And many of them were bought. So you actually ask the question, now, if these are the cars that you are supposed to chase thieves in, how on earth are you ever going to catch them?
It's impossible.
All right. Then there was the issue of housing. All right.
Yeah.
That one has remained. The housing that many police officers are saying are pigsties.
Yeah.
Okay. You find a wall is actually a curtain. That is a wall separating one family from another. Okay. But they had police units that dealt with castle rustling. It was called Goroko.
I know, Guru.
Yes. Now, it wasn't the only unit that existed. The key indicator of this group was people who were chosen from communities that were pastoral. So if you're agrarian, you wouldn't really find yourself there. So these are people who understood terrain, understood the business. Now, I'm moving fast forward now. We have problems in the Kerio Valley, we have problems in Marsabit, we have problems in Laikipia. You take GSU. What do they know about that terrain?
They know nothing.
You're going to get them killed.
All of them.
Yes. What happened to that thinking of understanding that these are the problems we tend to have in these areas so that you have units who are appropriately prepared to deal with this thing?
Right.
And then you find a situation where recently in Lamu, all these units gathered together. Okay, we're told 11, was it 15 perpetrators were killed? Okay. How many innocent citizens had to die?
More than we know.
Yes, before this action took place. And yes, 11 of them were killed. 11 out of how many? All I'm saying is this. You look at the coordination, the forces may exist. It's like there is some interdepartmental conflict and fighting. And usually the fighting is not for power, it's just money.
Definitely, and that is something that we know. City, you see, I like that you've given that particular chronology of events, but then again, you notice that when we are going to be pushing for reforms, we will have to also look at the practical things. We simply, I know Latif is feeling very strongly about, the laws and everything. That's the soft side. The hard part is who does what and where. You're talking about who was going to, keep here. Currently, you can't even access certain parts of, say, Kapedo. Sometime last year, even the Red Cross itself wouldn't access Kapedo. We, as an entity, were not even allowed there, right? Because they knew that this particular area was cordoned off and it was going to be accessed by a given group of officers, or rather law enforcement officers. So it is something that is shared knowledge. The persons in the law enforcement entity understand who is supposed to do what. But it's just laxity. And it's perpetrating that particular dysfunction because it keeps some of them in office, and it also puts money in their pockets. And that's well known. It's actually known to everyone.
Did you see where it played out in the West Gate? We discussed this week, where we have a squad that deals with urban terrorism. They know what to do. They're trained.
Of course.
And reports, if we're to believe them, they actually had the situation under control. And then what happens? The army rolls in, and you're thinking, these people are not trained to deal with this sort of thing.
You remember, City, when we started this particular conversation, I told you we are working with hard and fast written rules for a force, or rather a service, that is essentially discretionary.
Yes.
So if you know that, say, the record squad is the team that's supposed to go in this particular instance, but you send in the army,
what exactly are you doing?
What is it that we're doing?
Yeah.
And so we have those instances. But then again, like you spoke about the common officer who's doing what it is that they're supposed to do. Once you're commanded, you don't ask questions.
No.
You move.
No, you don't. But you see, within that ecosystem, this is my concern. That ecosystem is created by the higher-ups.
Yes.
Now, when I said that change will not occur, I am not being negative. I am simply saying that if the mindset at the top is what it is and they're determined to maintain the status quo, the ecosystem within which the police men and women exist in will continue generating the sort of things that we are now discussing. These extrajudicial killings, the way to deal with people. Because I can't even fathom the level of stress and frustration an ordinary officer has to undergo on a daily basis in the course of their work, and what it is that they require to just spark off.
Yeah.
I can't tell.
They require very little. We undertook some psychological sessions and debriefing sessions with some of the officers that we normally train, on an annual basis. And if you look at that particular report, rather the rapporteur was capturing very serious things, such as even basic stress, even marital issues. And in the event that you want to debrief, you are asked to speak to the chaplain. So what will the chaplain do for you? You see, this is at a very, very small scale.
Yeah.
So now imagine where you have to live in a small shack, 4 families, and you're supposed to go ahead and take care of the people who live right outside your compound. Would you do it properly? So it's not even just the person at the top. It's the livelihood, the day-to-day environment surrounding these particular officers. Because, like we said, the people at the top don't get affected. They sit in beautiful
They hardly do.
offices.
The only way to get them affected, and that's why I was bringing in the institutions such as the Constitutional Commission and a constitutional body such as the legislature, is because they've got the power, the mandate for oversight and to call accountability. If, like the report that you took before the National Assembly, you are hoping that something is going to be done about it. If you made concerted efforts to engage those members of parliament, to exert pressure even from outside, let it be public that this report is sitting before the National Assembly Committee on Security and Administration.
Lobby,
they
push
would
the
know
agenda.
that
We
they
are
have
doing
to do
that.
something about it.
Eric,
If the
we
Kenya
are doing
National
that.
Commission on Human Rights, do you know who sits in the Kenya National Commission on Human
I
Rights?
have no clue.
In fact, now there's some vetting that's taking place
clue. Yes.
in Parliament for new commissioners in that commission.
If you ask
We
me
even
about,
had
remember?
if
some
you ask
for
me
the
about
chairman.
IEBC, I can tell you.
Do
but
you remember again?
No.
So, such organizations, if Parliament was strong on oversight and calling for accountability, then they would be saying, this is the budget for the National Police Service Commission. This is the budget for the police countrywide. How are you utilizing it?
expect this
We are receiving these reports from, I'm a representative of Embakasi, of whatever,
Right.
and this is what I'm receiving from the ground.
Right.
Let's bring in. So who will be called there? The person who will be called is the CS, the PS,
Yeah.
the IG of police,
Yeah.
the DIGs. They'll come in there and they keep feeling the pressure, not coming so that they can get a moment to say, Mr. Chairman, in fact, even me, I refused. This we have to organize this thing, but they get proper fire.
Latif, let me tell you for sure that we are doing our part. And I'll give you an example. When you go to legislators, you'll find people who are open-minded, who mean business when it comes to reforms and human rights. And I'll give you an example of the late, may his soul rest in peace, Honorable Ken Okoth, who was very useful and instrumental in terms of partnering with IMLU to push for the Prevention of Torture Act. But you see, you don't get Ken Okoths every single day. Do you stop doing your bit? You still have to do your bit. Sometimes you get goodwill, sometimes you don't. But if you've done your bit, and then maybe you can keep strategizing and seeing what it is that we need to do. And now you've given, that's a good idea. How about we get adversarial? How about we become rogue for a minute or two just to push
go
a
more
minute,
public.
Right?
Oh, it's more
for
public
example,
about it.
It is.
Have constant public engagements and bring in more stakeholders. I'm sure IMLU works with very many other CSOs.
We do have that,
right?
yes.
And multi-stakeholder continuous public conversation, even on the ground, so that the people of Langata know that there is an issue with policing and that their MP ought to do something. The MP will listen to the ground.
Yes.
The MP will go to Parliament,
Yes.
knowing what the ground is saying.
We have done that. We have engaged with at least 13 police stations, Semukurueni, Kina, Garbatula, some places in Isiolo, Nakuru, being Keringet, and so on and so forth. We have taken this report back to the people. Of course, some who were part of our research and some who weren't. We have spoken to some of the OCSs and the OCPDs. We are engaging them. And definitely you find those ones who are open to even discussing and maybe even reading and asking for even follow-up. So it's being done. And we are talking to the benefactors, who would be the police officers, and also engaging CSOs. And I'll tell you, if you have to undertake this kind of advocacy in terms of budgeting and changes in the National Police Service, you have to have a buy-in of both the state and the CSOs.
Yep.
And we have that. We have a very robust referral mechanism that is chaired by Kenya National Human Rights Commission, being a national human rights institution. And we also have state agencies. And I've mentioned for you the 13 police stations, of course, not all of them. But my point there is that we are already making this public. We are, and we have at least trained 30 human rights monitors on this particular subject, talking to them about the recommendations and how it is that they can disseminate the same to their communities. Because then again, if that report is just for us to discuss in this particular beautiful office, who are we helping? We want these people on the ground, somewhere in Lumakanda where we had gone.
Where is Lumakanda?
It's in Western.
Which county?
In Kakamega County.
Okay. Yes.
So if that particular person there understands that there's an issue of budgeting, are they able to relay that? Are they able to even hear when we're looking at this particular political era, or rather electioneering period, are your people who you're going to vote in speaking around this particular issue? Because those are the pertinent issues.
Yes.
You can't be telling us that, I'll give you laptops, when we know the officer who's supposed to take care of me when my livestock is being stolen can't even wake up at night because they're hungry. They slept hungry. Right? So we are doing that, Latif. We are. In terms of advocacy is not measurable and very tricky for the most part. But I'd be happy to even share some of the steps that we've taken, of course, off record, and maybe even share with you some of the partners and what they've committed and what steps have been taken, because most of it is qualitative.
That's true.
We tell you about, we've reached 2 million, but most of it is qualitative for sure.
We of course acknowledge the work that's done by CSOs such as yourselves and others, and what more still can be done, even at the community level.
Yeah.
We just want everybody to get engaged. It's
Yeah.
not an issue of police are killing us, so police are our brothers and sisters, and we know them from home. They're not killers. So what happens? At what point does this person then turn and become
the killing actually is the last
If
stop.
they become part of the system, then
There has to be
dare
something.
say the system.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.